Hello, listeners. Been wondering how you can help the show? Probably not. But here are 5 things you can do. 1. Subscribe. Support the show by clicking the subscription link in the show notes. 2. Review on iTunes, on our website, www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com, or on whatever app you listen to. 3. Donate. When you go to our website, click the cute coffee cup icon, or in the show notes, click the subscription link. 4. Share. Sharing really is caring. Tell your friends and even your enemies to check out the show. 5. Watch. Wait a minute, it's a podcast, not a movie. Actually, it's both. Check the show notes to find out where to watch the documentary. You can also rent it on Prime Video. That's it. Oh, one last thing. Enjoy this episode.
Questions. We all have questions. Tonight's guest has answers. She's psychic and medical intuitive Julie Ryan of AskJulieRyan.com. Stick around to the end of the show and you'll find out how to get a free gift just for being a loyal listener. How special are you?
When I'm going back and doing a past life thing, it's like I step into a movie scene and I can tell you where it was, when it was. I can describe what's going on. I have a client who his dad was very ill and he lived here in Birmingham, Alabama with me. I mean, in the same city, but he grew up on a farm in North Carolina. And so I described to him what his house that he grew up in, that his parents lived in, looked like. And I described to him walking in the front door. And then this hallway went straight back and I was in a back bedroom and I described the dressers and where the mirror was in the room and all of that. He's like, yeah, you are spot on. It's like I'm a human MRI with medical stuff, Bob. And then with other stuff, it is absolutely remote viewing.
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
Julie Ryan is a psychic and medical intuitive. She can sense what medical conditions and illnesses a person has. She can facilitate energetic healings. She can see energy fields. And she can communicate with spirits both alive and dead. Julie can work from anywhere. In fact, it's rare that she is actually with someone while scanning them. In addition, Julie can scan animals, access people's past lives, and remove ghosts from homes and other buildings. And she can tell how close to death someone is. Julie isn't one of those psychics who had dead people stalking her since childhood. She learned the basics of how to do energy work more than 25 years ago, added and refined her techniques over the years, and has been doing it ever since. For the record, Julie doesn't turn her abilities on and off at will, and she doesn't go around scanning everyone. Someone's private information is theirs to share, only if they wish. So Julie will only scan when given permission and keep it confidential. But there's more. Although the psychic and medical intuitive aspects of Julie's life have been amazing side interests, she's basically a businesswoman, an inventor, an author, and a serial entrepreneur. During Julie's 35-year career, She has invented surgical devices that are sold throughout the world and founded several companies in the medical, natural gas, advertising, long-term care, compliance, and data breach prevention industries. Her website is www.askjulieryan.com. Hello, Julie Ryan of AskJulieRyan.com. I will be asking you a lot of questions tonight, Julie, and I thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, gosh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You have a very interesting bio and background. It's really fascinating. Once I got to your website, I spent a couple hours on it looking at stuff and looking up your podcast and your blog posts and YouTube videos. Let's start with your bio mentions you are a businesswoman, inventor, author, and serial entrepreneur. Let's talk first about what business accomplishments that you're most proud of and what are some of your most notable inventions?
Oh, gosh, business things I'm most proud of is that I have founded 9 companies in 5 industries in a little over 30 years. And people look at me like I'm half nuts and they say, well, how do you do that in all those different industries that aren't related? And I just say, well, it's rinse and repeat. If I'm interested in something, then I look for an opportunity to come up with a way to make it better or to enhance it. And my most well-known inventions are 2, Bob. One is a device used for orthopedic surgery when somebody gets a new hip or knee or shoulder for total joint surgery. And it's a device that collects their blood and puts their own blood back into them. It's a disposable device. And it's been on the market for a little over 30 years now. So it gives the patient's own whole blood back to them, which is really good. It helps them heal quicker, better, quicker, faster, that kind of thing. And then my other best known invention is a product called the bass, like the fish, the bass, BASS.
Yeah.
And it's a big mat that goes on the floor in surgery when a shoulder or a knee or a hip are getting scoped. There's lots of irrigation fluid that comes out of the body as the surgeon is in there doing repairs and looking around. And that water, sometimes 30, 40, 50 liters, it's contaminated because imagine it's coming out of a knee or a hip, goes on the floor. And the staff, including the surgeon in the operating room, they all have boots on. They have galoshes on because there's so much water. So I invented a device that's a big mat that goes on the floor that's hooked up to suction, and it collects, contains, and evacuates that contaminated fluid. And the funny part about that product, Bob, and that's also been on the market for close to 20 years now. But the funny thing about that is what BASS stands for. And that is the big ass suction system. And when I had a prototype of the product and we were testing it in surgery, I was in Nashville, Tennessee, and this Bubba of an ortho tech looked at me and he said, "Lady, you got something really amazing here. You got one big ass suction system. Y'all need to call this thing the bass." And so I did, and I trademarked it, and I just think that's such a fun story about the bass. So that was on the packaging labels on the cases that were shipped interstate, because you got to do that, to have the trademark be legit. And I have lots of patents and trademarks, but that one's my favorite.
That's funny. These seem like nice common sense things. Like did you have like a friend that was in healthcare that was like, God, I have this problem. I just wish you could solve it. How did you get inspired for these 2 inventions in particular?
Yes, that's exactly what happened. I was in the medical supply business on the supply side of the equation for 30 plus years. And so I knew a lot of people in the industry. And oftentimes I would have people come to me and say, "This is such a hassle when this happens. Can you come up with a way to help us solve this problem?" Which it's a big leap going from, "Can you help us solve this problem?" to getting a product invented, getting it patented, getting it released, getting the trademarks, all that kind of stuff. And so, yes, that's exactly what happened. I would have people come up to me all the time and say, "This is such a hassle," or "This doesn't work very well," or "This is a problem. Can you come up with a way to help us solve it?"
You obviously are a problem solver. Who do you take after most in your family, you think, that got you onto this business kick and all the stuff that you do for entrepreneurs? And was there anyone in your family that was, You are a psychic and a medical intuitive. Are you the first one in the Ryan family that has this skill, or is there someone before you?
To my knowledge, I am. I believe everybody comes in with the ability, and it's just a matter of developing and enhancing it. I teach people all over the world how to do all the woo-woo stuff that I do. I say I'm a businesswoman who learned how to do woo-woo, and I'm a buffet of psychicness. So once you get in touch with spirit, you can take it anywhere you want. I can scan people medically. I'm like a human MRI. I help facilitate energetic healings. I communicate with deceased loved ones, with deceased pets. I can tell how close to death somebody is. I can do past life stuff. I mean, it's just all spirit. It's all the same thing. So we can take it anywhere we want. To answer your question about was there anybody in my family who was an entrepreneur, the only person to my knowledge that was my paternal grandfather, my granddad Ryan, who was a pharmacist and a lawyer, and he owned a couple of pharmacies from, I would say, from the 20s till when he passed in the mid 60s. Now, he died when I was 3, so I didn't really know him, but he's the only one that I know of that had that entrepreneurial spirit. Everybody else had a regular job, and they still do.
Your business side, I start with that first because someone who is so good and prolific at businesses and has that mindset to jump into being a psychic and a medical intuitive, I mean, that's kind of it's not the safest business choice to migrate to, but you jumped in with both feet and you're doing it quite well. When did you decide to turn this gift into a business discipline that would command a good portion of your time?
Well, the short story of the long story is I was interested in this stuff 30 years ago. And somebody gave me a book, a girlfriend gave me a book that I read by a woman named Carolyn Mace, who called herself a medical intuitive. And I thought, what the heck is that? I'd never heard that before. Certainly, I was interested in healing and from the hospital supply side of the equation with products and devices. And so I read her book and I wanted to know more. So I went to the bookstore, Bob, because we didn't have the internet yet. There was no Amazon. And I went to the bookstore and I found a book called Hands of Light by a woman who was a former NASA physicist named Barbara Brennan. And she talked about using quantum physics principles and parlaying them into understandable English for the non-scientific mind. I mean, I have a business degree. I invented all these devices, but I hired engineers to draw up my ideas. And so I read her book and I wanted to know more. And I called her school and asked if there was anybody in my area teaching this stuff, perhaps a graduate of hers. And lo and behold, there was. So I studied with this woman for 6 years and learned how to do, I was primarily interested in the medical stuff. And then everything else came in. So the short end of this long explanation is I decided to jump in with this about 6 years ago when I sold my medical surgical device manufacturing company. And I still have other companies on the side that kind of run on their own. I have wonderful people helping me. And I was led and prompted by a dead pope. And that's another fun story.
I was actually going to ask you about that. So yes, you're. Let's talk about that dead pope, who ironically is kind of, the pope of the pandemic, almost. You want to tell us about that?
Exactly. Sure. One time when I was with my mentor, her name's Susan, when she does a healing on me, Bob, I'm on a massage table face up with a blankie on me, I'm all snuggly. And my deceased loved ones' spirits are on either side of the table and they participate in the healing and I can see them and so can my mentor, Susan. And one day this figure of a pope, this spirit of a pope showed up with his pope hat and his whole pope outfit on. And I said, well, who are you? And he said, I'm Clement. And I said, well, I never heard of a Pope Clement. Now, mind you, I went through 12 years of Catholic schools and I still had never heard of a Pope Clement.
Yeah.
And he kind of chuckled and he said, well, I was number 6. I said, okay, fine. May I help you? Kind of like, I'm thinking, why are you here? And he said, you're supposed to teach the world what happens when somebody dies.
Oh, boy.
Because it's been so bastardized and people are so afraid And it's crazy because it's glorious. And he knew that I could see what happens when somebody's dying, how the person's surrounded by angels and their deceased loved ones and the spirits of deceased pets. So I said to him, I'm not doing that. I'm a businesswoman. People are going to think
you
I'm
argued with the
nuts.
Pope. My God, Julie, that is amazing for a
Absolutely.
Catholic.
Absolutely. I do it all the time. Argue with him. I don't call it arguing. I call it debating. And so he said, yeah, just do it. Just get on with it. He treats me like a Nike ad. He says to me all the time, just do it, when I tell him why I can't do something. So I got in my car to leave, Bob. And the interesting thing was I was led to look him up on the internet on my phone, sitting in my car. Well, come to find out, this guy's in office during the Black Plague, when 2/3 of Europe died.
Yeah,
And
wow.
he's best known for his prayers for the dying and his prayers for the dead. And I thought, Ryan, you can't make that stuff up. I mean, I never heard of a Pope Clement, and here he is in the room. And Susan, my mentor, could see him too. So he prompted me. And quite frankly, it took several years for me to get the golden ovary courage. You know, boys have brass balls, girls have golden ovaries.
Okay.
It took me several years to have the courage to write a book about what happens when somebody's dying. I call it angelic attendance, what happens as we transition from this life into the next. And interestingly enough, was a situation where I was at church one Sunday, several years after he'd shown up initially, and the priest is giving his sermon on the altar, and Pope Clement's standing next to him, and I can see him. And the priest said, wouldn't it be interesting if somebody could really tell us whether angels and our deceased loved ones greet us and lead us into paradise? And I'm thinking, seriously, God, from the pulpit, you're giving me grief about this.
Wow.
And so I did. And I was really worried that it would affect my other businesses and affect my reputation, really, as a businesswoman.
Yeah. One of my guests, in fact, you're the most popular guest. You're probably a person you could, because you do a similar thing. His name's Rob Guttrow. He's a pet psychic. And so the episode, which is like 7 times more popular than any other episode, was about connecting to your pet on the other side. I had him connect to a friend of mine whose past year was like a country music song. His mom died, his brother died, his dog died, we got divorced, like all this stuff, right? And he really kind of missed his dog, but he was really skeptical. So anyway, Rob did a reading, a phone reading, and he was like spot on. It was crazy. So it's like, but he's a meteorologist by day. So there's this kind of like battle between the science and his psychic, but actually they coexist because meteorology, energy is a lot of what his belief is as a psychic too. Is that similar with you? The whole energy side of it is just kind of makes sense from what you know about your business, your science, your medical supply background. It kind of meshes with what you know and what you practice as a medical intuitive.
Yes, very much. Everything is made of energy. We're taught that early on in science classes in grade school. And I'm sitting at my big cherry desk in my recording room right now where I do my weekly show. And the desk feels very solid, but I know that it's just energy that's vibrating more slowly than the energy we're using to connect here to record this show. And we all have the ability. I think that's the key, Bob, is everybody comes in with the ability. And it's just a matter of enhancing it, developing it, and enhancing it. Little children are very good at psychic and telepathic things. And then it starts to wane when they're about 7 years old because they've had a lot of grown-ups, whether that be a parent or grandparent or a teacher, say to them, well, honey, that's just your imagination. There really isn't an imaginary friend named Leo who follows you around. When actually this child can communicate with and see their imaginary friend even when the adults can't. So it's a matter of everybody has the ability. We've all had situations where we had a gut feeling about something and we didn't follow it and then we regretted it. That's guidance coming in from spirit.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that's really important to remember is thoughts do not originate in our heads, Bob. They originate in the ethers and we pull them in based on what we're thinking about. Emotions are really important in this formula because when we feel neutral or good, we're in alignment with our spirit. And God, your angels, your deceased loved ones, your spirit guides can advise you. When you feel badly, any emotion that feels badly is based in fear, and it's letting us know we're out of alignment. So it's warranting some investigation. Is this a real fear? Is this a rational fear? Is this going to hurt me or kill me, literally? Or is this an irrational fear and it just feels like it is, which is false if it's an irrational fear. And that's 99.9% of the thoughts we have that feel badly.
Yeah, that's my
They're
problem.
false. Yeah. You make them up.
Yeah, I'll be driving and I'm thinking of negative things, and they haven't even happened yet.
Yeah.
Do thoughts come to us? You said it comes from like the ether or outside of our ether.
Right.
Are they sent to us from someone else, or how do we develop our thoughts?
No, thoughts come into us from the ethers. And like what I was just explaining, when we have an emotion that feels neutral or good, we're in alignment with our spirit and we can get guidance from spirit. So again, those thoughts are still coming in from the ethers. They're coming from our spirit, our deceased loved ones, our angels, our spirit guides, those entities, God, and whatever you want to call God. If you want to call God Buddha or the universe or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's all energy. It's all the same thing. And when we're having thoughts coming in, they come in, all thoughts have their own frequency, Bob, and it's like they're on a radio station that's broadcasting. You were talking about country song. I always tease my husband who loves country music. I always say there's Mama, the truck, and the dog pretty much in every song.
Yeah.
and that's, the country music station is broadcasting country songs. If you turn to a different station, perhaps it's broadcasting classic rock. That's how this works. And so when we have a thought that feels badly, you know how it leads to another thought, another thought, another thought. And before long, you feel awful because you're in this black hole of all these bad thoughts that you've made up. They're all fake. And spirit has trouble communicating on the I feel crappy channels just because the vibration level's too low. So the trick that I teach people is called the 2-minute rule. And here's what you do. You just ask yourself, is this going to kill me in the next 2 minutes? If I don't get this chocolate candy bar that I really, really want, that I keep seeing advertised everywhere on TV and in magazines and stuff, and it's just driving me nuts. If I don't get it, I can't find it. The stores are sold out. Is that going to kill me in the next 2 minutes? Nope, it's not. May feel like it is, but it's not. As soon as you ask that question, you change the channel, you disrupt that frequency, and then you'll get guidance from spirit. Okay, well, maybe go look at the 7-Eleven on the corner of Main and 3rd.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
By the way, your husband, I had a guest on my show that had a ghost experience. I was crazy, but I would kind of define them as somewhat of a country band. You should have them check out 3 and 20. That's a really cool band. The number 3 and 20.
Okay.
That's on the side.
I will.
Julie, according to your website, again, askjulieryan.com, you get a lot of services. Your services include medical scanning, talking to the deceased, PET scanning, a dying person scan, past lives, and the paranormal. What are your most requested services?
Medical, by far. And I have a lot of doctors and other medical providers that send their patients to me when they can't figure out what's going on. Because I'm like a human MRI, Bob. I connect with the person's spirit energetically. I connect with their spirit, my spirit to their spirit. And I can see in my mind's eye broken bones, torn ligaments, viral infections, bacterial infections, cancer, whatever. And as soon as something's identified, then I'll watch an energetic healing begin. And that can take the form of something getting added, something getting removed. I watch procedures all the time that emulate what I saw in the operating room for all those decades. I also see healings that utilize methodologies and devices that haven't been invented yet. So it's fascinating watching this and then seeing the results. I think it's important to mention, however, that no doctor, no surgeon, no medical provider, no healer heals anybody else. We all heal ourselves. I talk in analogies a lot, Bob, because I think it gives our human minds a frame of reference for all this woo-woo stuff we're discussing.
Well, shamans believe that, Julie, right? I mean,
Well, yeah.
Shamans believe that they can, same thing.
Well, I use the analogy of, if you're having surgery, at the end of your procedure, the surgeon's going to close the incision with surgical staples or sutures. The surgeon doesn't make your skin grow back. You make your skin grow back. The patient makes their own skin grow back. So it's spirit working through me and with me. And I tell people, I'm like the tugboat captain and you're the ship. I'm going to help steer you safely into port. And then you're going to integrate the energetic healing in a way that's going to best facilitate whatever your spirit is exploring in this lifetime. It's really fascinating, the stuff that I get to see. And then oftentimes things will show up on a subsequent X-ray or MRI. And every once in a while, I'll have a doctor call me and say, what are you doing with my patient? And how does this stuff work?
Yeah.
And it's really fun when that happens.
Are any of your clients, do they have issues where it's something the doctors don't know what it is? And I ask this kind of selfishly. I have an older brother. He was a scientist. He focused on voles and mice and lemmings, and he was involved in the white-nosed bat syndrome thing. And he finally retired, and he moved to New Mexico, Albuquerque. And then he got his autoimmune system just got totally blew up, and he's having issues left and right. But the doctors don't know what it is. Problems keep happening. They give him steroids.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever have situations like that where the doctors don't know what's going on? Can you do a scan and tell me what you think?
Yeah, multiple times every day.
Okay.
Every workday.
Every day. Okay.
Yeah. And so many of my clients have been to see multiple doctors and have had symptoms in some instances for years. And they say, oh, God, this is just not going anywhere. Like your brother, they just keep giving me medicine and they're creating a pharmaceutical patient for life, but I still have the symptoms. It's not helping. And oftentimes it's because our medical system is so segregated. We got the orthopedist and the cardiologist and the neurologist and the OBGYNs and, rheumatologists and all of that. Whereas when I get somebody on my radar, the information that I'm going to get is it's almost as if we're reverse engineering the symptoms, Bob.
Yep.
And we're going to, what's the cause of this? If we can figure out what the cause is and we can fix that, then the symptoms go away almost miraculously. And it just happens over and over and over again. So I do everything. I talk to deceased loved ones all the time, talk to deceased pets, talk to alive pets when there are behavior or health issues. I scan pets all the time. Past lives are really fun to do those, to see what the information we get. Oftentimes we can corroborate it with historical documents online, and then we'll correlate it with what's going on with a person's current life. And it gives us a lot of helpful information. The other thing that I do all the time is I work with families who have a loved one who's dying, and I can tell how close to death the person is, and I can communicate with them, and I can talk about their deceased loved ones that are there with them and deceased pets. It's really funny when I see farm animals, spirits in the room with the dying person, and I'll say, okay, did your grandmother grow up on a farm? Because there are cows and chicks and goats, and ducks and pigs and stuff like that in there. And they'll say, yeah, she did. And I'll say, yeah, I figured.
Yeah, that was one of my next questions, because you would think about it. The dying person scan sounds terrifying on the surface, but I guess it's comforting from your standpoint, because you really kind of help them. I mean, look, a lot of the message in what you do is death is kind of a transition. And I want to go into your book, because angel attendants, where there's like 12 phases of transition.
Right.
But really, it's got to be, it's almost like being a hospice worker that's remote, working virtually. How does it work? Can you walk us through a scenario where you help someone identify that?
Sure. As somebody's dying, Bob, we're all a spirit attached to a body having a human experience. And the spirit is the main part of us. It's the everlasting part of us. The body's inside the spirit, and it's all holographic. When I was going through Catholic schools, I was taught by the nuns that the spirit or the soul is someplace in the chest area. That's not what I perceive. And interestingly enough, Bob, if you look at old masters' paintings, most of the time a religious figure will be depicted with a halo around their head or around their whole body. That's their energy field. It's their spirit. It's their aura. It's all the same thing. It's on the outside of the body. It's what we test. It's what we're utilizing to get information when we're doing EEGs and EKGs. They put the electrodes on your chest and on your head.
Yep.
They don't put them inside of you, but they're getting information on the outside of you through your energy field, which is your spirit. The spirit is the power source for the body, which is why when somebody dies and their body and their spirit separate, the body doesn't work anymore. So as somebody's dying, their spirit disengages and it hangs on to the top of the head. It looks like a cartoon caption bubble where you'd see the thoughts or the words of a cartoon character are enclosed. And then deceased loved ones show up. The closest deceased maternal spirit shows up first. So in my instance, my mother's deceased, she would show up. If my mother was still alive, it would be my maternal grandmother if she was still alive. If not her, it would be her mother. It's always on the maternal side. And then the paternal spirit shows up. But it's the mother energy that really runs the show from the spirit world, calls in the angels, calls in deceased loved ones. And so everybody goes through what I call the 12 phases of transition, which is a configuration of all those entities that I mentioned, angels, deceased loved ones, the spirits of deceased pets, how they go through different configurations as the person is approaching death. The angels start out in a big circle around the person. They open into a horseshoe, eventually forming a line with the deceased maternal and paternal spirit, anchoring the line. And then other hundreds, if not thousands of other deceased loved ones' spirits show up, and the spirits of deceased pets show up as well. Now, it's important to note too, Bob, that everybody goes through the 12 phases of transition, whether they die instantly in the case of a homicide or suicide, or whether they die over a prolonged period of time, like days, weeks, months, sometimes even years. And I think another important point to remember is that time doesn't exist in the spirit world. Time is a human creation. People say, well, how could we go through the 12 phases if somebody dies instantly? Well, because in the spirit world, time doesn't exist. So 100 lifetimes of 100 years may not even be a blip on the radar screen in our reality. So that's what I see. So I can scan somebody anywhere in the world, real time, and I can tell you what phase they're in. I can communicate telepathically with the person who's dying, whether they can communicate verbally or not. And I can relay information to the family. And there are 3 questions I always ask. The first one is, are you ready to go? Followed by, are you in pain? And then the third question is, what do you need? And that just ranges, all across the spectrum.
Yeah.
From, I need chocolate to, I need you to pay my taxes before I die.
So, Julie, are you talking, like my mother passed of dementia probably 6-7 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And I heard this on a prior pod. The same thing happened with her, right? They stopped giving her food. I mean, she had lost a ton of weight. It amazed me how much she struggled to survive for 7 days. I mean, I can't run a mile. I mean, she's like struggling with every breath and she's fighting to survive, no food, dehydrated like crazy. And of course, when she passed was when everyone left the room, which happens all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, which doesn't
It
surprise
does.
me, right? So I guess I have a question. That happens a lot. And also the mother thing. What if you didn't have a good relationship with your mother? Like my mom, she's kind of abandoned by her mother, but that doesn't matter, I guess. On the other side, your mom is still there and it's kind of like it's all forgiven and they are there to bring you through.
Great question. All of the human personality traits that we think of stay with the body when somebody dies. All spirit is pure love. The most atrocious human that's ever lived, that person's spirit is pure love. So all of that personality stays with the body when somebody dies. And what's interesting along those lines is if somebody's adopted, it's the mom that raises them. If she's deceased, her spirit runs the show from the spirit world. The birth mom is there, but it would be the adopted mom or the stepmom if there's another mom that's raised a child. They're the ones that are running the show from the spirit world. I think that's really remarkable. Furthermore, when I am scanning somebody who wants to have a baby, babies' spirits, we all choose when we're born, where we're born, to whom we're born, and the circumstances into which we're born, Bob, so that our lives can have a basic trajectory to experience and explore things that we want to in this lifetime. And like that, when we die, we all choose when we go, how we go, who's with us when we go, or if we're alone. and what all the circumstances are. You alluded to that earlier. Ask any funeral director and they'll have unlimitless stories about, yeah, we sat with grandma for 3 weeks and then Aunt Susie was on duty and she got up to get a cup of coffee, left the room for 3 minutes and grandma died while she was out of the room.
That happened to you,
And
right? With your aunt? You had the same
it was
thing.
my grandmother.
Your grandmother. Okay. All right.
My grandmother, yes. And it's very common. And it's because the person who's dying, well, with my mother, when my mother died, I was the only one with her. Everybody else was on their way, but she left about 10 minutes before they arrived. So it's very common. And the family gets upset about that oftentimes because they have a lot of guilt that the person was alone. But nobody dies alone. They're surrounded by angels and deceased loved ones, for heaven's sakes. The other thing that I'm hearing a lot of in the past year and a half is the people who've been in nursing homes and hospitals who've died during the pandemic and the family couldn't be with them and they also weren't able to say goodbye before the person died. And it's creating so much pain for the family. And I'm here to tell you, your loved one was surrounded by angels and deceased loved ones. It was glorious what was going on. And now they can talk to you and they're around you all the time.
What happens if, those horrific situations where the child dies before the mother? Who meets that child? Is it the grandmother, the great-grandmother? Who takes that mother role?
Whoever the person is that's deceased in that maternal line will be the one that will run this show from the spirit world. They and the angels and all of the deceased loved ones will greet them and lead them into paradise.
Awesome. You wrote a book on this, Angelic Attendants. We want them to buy the book, of course. So tell us, where they can get the book, but what's kind of the structure? How did you structure that book?
They can get it anywhere books are sold. It's on Amazon. It's Barnes & Noble. It's on Apple Books. It's in Walmart. It's in Target, a lot of places. And how it's structured is I talk a little bit about what my journey is. How did I get from being a businesswoman and an inventor to doing all this woo-woo stuff? And then I talk about my experience with my mother, who died in 2002, Bob. And that was the first time I saw the 12 phases of transition. She was an educator. She was a teacher and a principal. And that was her parting gift to me. And that's what Pope Clement was talking about when he showed up the first time. He said, I know you know what goes on. You got to teach the world. I'm saying, I'm not doing that. And then we go through in detail what the 12 phases of transition are. Most of the book is stories of families with whom I've worked when they've had a loved one dying. And they're just heartwarming and at times funny, and at times you'll cry, you'll laugh. I have so many people that read the book that say, I couldn't put it down. The other thing I think that's important to note too, Bob, is there's a book called Death is But a Dream that was written by a doctor who's a hospice director in Buffalo named Chris Kerr, Kerr. And he did university-based research on 1,400 of his hospice patients, 90% of whom report seeing deceased loved ones and the spirits of deceased pets as they were approaching death, either in dreams or visions. So his book corroborates with scientific research everything I talk about from the spiritual side. So read my book first, and if you want to know more, then read Chris's book. I was teasing him when I first spoke with him, and I said, I love it when science catches up with woo-woo.
Yeah, that's great. So obviously you believe in the afterlife. Was there a point in your life when you didn't? I mean, you grew up Catholic, and that kind of implies that you do. Was there a turning point in your life where you're like, yep, irrefutable, this is what I definitely think happens?
Well, yeah, with my mother, when I saw this happen with my mother.
Okay.
I think that the Catholics do a really good job with little children instilling in them the belief in angels and saints and the Holy Spirit and stuff like that. And even to the point where in my early 60s now, I can recite the guardian angel prayer that I said every night going to bed. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here, ever this day be at my side to light, to guard, to rule and guide. Amen. So they do a good job of laying the foundation that this is a possibility. I sometimes will have very rarely, but I've had a couple of instances where somebody has said, well, I don't believe that this is true. And I'd say, well, that's fine. And they'll say, well, I don't believe in spirits. And a lot of times they're very into their church or their religion. And I'll say, well, do you pray? And they'll say, yeah, of course I pray. And I say, well, to whom do you pray? And they'll say Jesus or God or St. Anthony or whomever. And I'll say, great. When you're talking to that person, either aloud or in your head, are they sitting next to you on the couch? Can you see them? Are they physically there? And they'll say, no, of course they're not. And I'll say, oh, so you're talking to a spirit and you're asking a spirit to help you with a situation? And it usually, my husband would say, it would bumfuddles them. It's like, whoa, I never thought of it that way. But we all do it. If we have a deceased loved one, most people will talk to them. And most people will get a thought in their head immediately after making a statement or asking a question to a deceased loved one. That's your loved one that's answering you telepathically. That's how spirits communicate. Similar situation with guidance from spirit in a religious context. My mother and grandmothers used to pray to St. Anthony when they lost something. They'd say this prayer, Tony, Tony, look around, something's lost and must be found. And inevitably they'd find it. But they'd get a thought come in their head of where to look or check here or call this person or retrace your steps back to this point, and they'd find it. So we all do it. We've all done it since the beginning of time. We just weren't aware of it.
Yeah, I've done that too, actually. Yeah. And it worked. Who's the one? Oh God, who's the one when you want to sell your house? I needed to sell my house really bad.
St.
And I went
Joseph.
and got St. Joseph. I had to bury him upside. I had my kids say the prayer over them because they're more pure than me. Eventually, right on when I was literally could not afford it anymore, it solved, which is great.
Yeah.
We all do that. Some psychics and mediums, they only deal with like light beings and positive energy. You actually don't believe in dark entities or demons or things like that. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. Very much so.
Okay. So it's weird because like my show kind of covers a bunch of different stuff, which is interesting, even some of the dark stuff. I'm just curious, on the religious side of you, there is like a belief, or correct me if I'm wrong, is there like fallen angels and Satan? Do you believe in fallen angels and Satan, or is that? No, you don't. Okay.
No. I think that's all been crafted over the ages, Bob, to control the masses, because spirit is pure love. It's kind of like, here's another analogy for you. It's like the sun. The sun does one thing. The sun shines. It shines its light. The sun doesn't care if you have sunscreen on or not. Doesn't care if it's raining where you are. Doesn't care if you're at the beach or you're driving in your car. The sun shines light. That's what spirit does. That's what God does. Spirit is energy, and it's a collective energy, and all it is pure love. So all of the demons and all of that stuff have all been concocted to control the masses. My goodness, we're in a tremendous amount of fear, in a climate of fear right now with all the pandemic stuff for the past year and a half. And look at how it controls people. Look at the Nazis. Look at throughout history. And spirit is pure love. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier about we know when we're in alignment with our spirit or not, because when we feel neutral or good, we are. When we feel badly, we're out of alignment. It's based in fear. And I think that's one of the things that people are starting to learn from this pandemic situation, and that is to follow their own guidance. Because it's so all over the board. They'll tell you one thing and then they come back and they change it a week later, and you've already followed the first advice. And then the subsequent advice is just completely opposite. And I think it's giving us the opportunity to really tune in to what does it feel like to us? Regardless of what some experts saying, regardless of what our family and friends are saying, trying to pressure us to do something or not do something, how does it feel to us? Pay attention to that.
Yeah, I made this documentary, which is the same title as this. It's called Afraid of Nothing. And at the end, the last part of it kind of covers people that had some experiences. And then there's kind of a wrap up. And the wrap up, there is a couple people were talking about that. Yeah, there is no tell so-and-so I'm sorry. There is no need to say you're sorry. It's pure love on the other side. It's all pure love, which is great. It's comforting. So that means that it's just a human condition that has good and evil, basically. Evil just is here on earth.
Well, yeah, because if you think about it, we all incarnate to create and explore an experience. And we're creators. There are, gosh, billions and bazillions of things that we can create. We create every day. We get up, we get out of bed, we create brushing our teeth, we create making a cup of coffee, we create breakfast, perhaps, we create getting in the car and driving to work. All of that, which are all transitions back to we transition when we die. It's just a different state. We transition all day, every day in different ways. But the whole fear thing has been concocted by people in power trying to control the masses because fear is the best way to control humans. Not to mention, it's been proliferated by the publishing industry and the entertainment industry. And so if you show somebody a gargoyle in our Western culture, they're going to think it looks scary because that's what we've been taught. If you show somebody a gargoyle, perhaps in an indigenous tribe in the middle of the Amazon that's never seen one before, they're going to say, oh, cool. What is this? Is this kind of like a dog or what is this? They're not going to be afraid of it. I mean, we're taught to fear things. And this is another example of it.
Seems a lot of the work you do is kind of remote viewing or controlled remote viewing. Were you trained in that, or how did you figure out how to do this remote viewing to see things?
Well, I teach this in my classes. And the funny thing about this, Bob, is that every intelligence agency on the planet has remote viewers.
Yeah.
And have had for years. I mean, heavens, look at King Arthur. He had Merlin the magician, right? And popes and kings and queens throughout history and rulers and emperors, they all had seers and visionaries and psychics and astrologers and all those guys that were able to do remote viewing. Everybody can do remote viewing. Again, it's just a matter of developing and enhancing your abilities. So as I was starting to learn to connect with spirit, and I talk about this in my book, information started coming in, and it came in different ways. Initially, I would see colors, and then those colors went into a grid. It was almost like a grid of the body, a blueprint that we would see in a building or a home. And then I started seeing body parts, and then I started seeing if somebody has a fall, and oftentimes I'll get a call from, now it's my friend's grandkids who will say, okay, little Johnny fell off the swing set. He's on his way to the emergency room. Can you scan him? And I'll say, yeah, he's got a broken shoulder. His right shoulder's broken. Here's where it's broken. He's going to need to be in a sling for a while. So yeah, that's how it developed. And it continues to develop. It's interesting because the more I do this, the more advanced the healings. I work on DNA all the time, watch DNA get resequenced. I watch tumors and other illnesses get removed from the body. And how it works is it happens on the energetic level, and as I alluded to earlier, and then it integrates into the body based on how the receiver, the person with whom I'm working, how their spirit, it's all predicated on how the spirit wants to explore and experience it.
So you have like a laser focus on remote viewing. Other people remote viewing, they're like seeing a building. You're like going right inside the body, right inside the...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I scan people's houses all the time when they're buying a house, or oftentimes somebody will be buying a house and they'll say, okay, I'm going to send the inspector in. He's going in next Monday. Can you scan the house ahead of time? And I'll give him a list of all the things to have the inspector check. Like, you got rotting wood in the upper left eaves on the third floor, and you got mold in the main stairway going upstairs on the left side of the wall, and all of that. And so then the person will hand the inspector a checklist, and the inspector will come back and say, okay, how did you know this? There's no way you could have known this.
Oh.
Or I will, if somebody has lost something, sometimes I can help them with that. When I'm going back and doing a past life thing, it's like I step into a movie scene, and I can tell you where it was, when it was. I can describe what's going on. I have a client who, his dad was very ill, and He lived here in Birmingham, Alabama with me. I mean, in the same city, but he grew up on a farm in North Carolina. And so I described to him what his house that he grew up in, that his parents lived in, looked like. And I described to him walking in the front door. And then this hallway went straight back, and I was in a back bedroom, and I described the dressers and where the mirror was in the room and all of that. He's like, yeah, you are spot on. It's like I'm a human MRI with medical stuff, Bob. And then with other stuff, it is absolutely remote viewing.
Now, how remote viewing do you ever talk about woo-woo? And, UFOs are really huge. I've had a couple of people on my shows about, the Pentagon report and stuff.
Yeah.
Have you ever dealt with someone where maybe a past life regression where they were on another planet or another life form or something like that?
I have. It's one of my favorite stories. There was a guy that called into my show one night on a Thursday night, and he said, can you tell me if I have any past lives in which I was an engineer? And so I do what I call past life scans. Most people do past life regressions. I do a scan where we'll ask a question like, does Bob have any past lives in which he was an engineer? And then I'll say, show me the lifetime that correlates the most with this current life. And it'll be like I'm walking into a movie scene, and kind of like Alice going through the looking glass, in Wonderland.
Yeah.
And so I saw this scene that looked like a Star Wars set. And I thought, holy Moses, what is this? And I thought it was a future life at first. There were flying vehicles. It literally looked like something right out of Star Wars. And so I asked, what year is this? Well, the year was 1931, I believe. And I'm thinking, what? This was a past life on a different planet. And so I got that this guy was in charge of the electrical grid. Everything that powered the flying cars, everything that powered the buildings, and the whole 9 yards of it. And I asked him, I said, what kind of engineer are you? And he said, I'm an electrical engineer and I work on jet engines.
Wow.
All right. It's so fun, Bob. I always say, you just can't make this stuff up. I'm not that creative.
Let's talk about the Ask Julie show, or Ask That, on your website has you can submit a question on the website. Is it a radio show that you do every week or a podcast?
It is. It's a syndicated radio show that we release as a podcast, so it's on demand. It's every Thursday night from 7 to 9 Central, 8 to 10 Eastern. And people call in from all over the world. It's kind of like Dear Abby meets Woo Woo.
Yeah.
I mean, they ask questions about their health, a loved one's health, their pet's health. Can we talk to a deceased loved one? Should I take this job? Is it a good idea for me to move? Should I marry this person? Can you do a past life? It's just all across the board. And it's really fun, Bob, because I never know who's going to call in.
Yeah.
And I never know what their questions are. And I certainly don't know what Spirit's answer is going to be, because it's Spirit communicating through me and with me. And it's just a blast. We laugh, we cry sometimes, if somebody's calling in and they've just lost a loved one, or oftentimes the biggest tears are when somebody's lost a pet.
Oh, yeah.
You alluded to that earlier. And so it's really fun. I did show 274 last Thursday. So 275 will be this week. And then I'll have people tell me a couple of things. They'll say, I can be in a crummy mood and I just turn on your show. I'll download it or I'll listen to it on the podcast app, and it makes me feel better. I'm not even really paying attention to what's being said. It just makes me feel better. And I'll say that's because my energy is so cranked up because I'm scanning people all over the world to answer their questions. And then the other thing that I hear often is that people will listen to a couple of shows and then they'll go back and they'll listen to a bunch of old shows, and they learn something from every show that's helpful either for them or their loved ones.
Yeah, that's got to be good for you too, because I would imagine a lot of these calls, you forget them a couple of weeks later, right? Now it's chronicled for you, it's documented, and you can go back and relive that and remember, oh yeah, that was such a crazy good show.
Well, I talk to probably easily 3,000 people a year.
Yeah.
And when I'm in and out of different realities, I don't necessarily remember what's been said, which is great because I operate under HIPAA if we're doing a medical thing. I don't disclose any information we talk about on our private sessions, and I do those all day, 5 days a week, is confidential. And so it's helpful, but I don't remember. Certainly, I remember the person and I remember information about them, like where they live and they've got kids or whatever, but I don't remember the details. So you're absolutely right. Certainly, the radio show and podcast are public. And so people call in and I'll always say, okay, Bob, where are you calling from? Where are you located? My listeners get a kick out of hearing that. And so it's just a blast.
Do you ever get sick of people?
No.
What do you think of humanity overall? I mean, a lot of people would say it's kind of deteriorated. What's your view on people nowadays?
Oh, I think people are fabulous. That's the most fun part of what I do with this work is getting to meet people from all over the world and hearing their stories. No, everybody has redeeming qualities. People that are just, we consider them to be evil or obnoxious or whatever. They're just operating from fear. That's all it is. And then when somebody shows them information that can help them from a spiritual standpoint, I think that it helps them develop. And who knows, maybe those people that have the snarkiest personalities were living with somebody who had a snarky personality in a past life. And this round, they wanted to see what it felt like to be that person. And the other thing I think that's so important to remember, Bob, is we're here to create, and we create out of the conflict or out of the contrast. If we know what we don't want, it helps us create what we do want. And that's the bottom line. And then when we're done creating, we go back to non-physical. We transition and we die and we go back to heaven, and then we dream up something else we want to come back and explore. That's how it works.
Well, that would explain why there's some evil here on Earth, because it gives us kind of creative inspiration, I guess, to a certain degree.
Yeah. And it's all coming from fear. And the other thing that's hard to wrap our human minds around is that everything unfolds perfectly and it's benefiting us in some way, or it's benefiting the person that it's affecting in some way. Most people that have been through tragedy or really tumultuous times will be the first ones to tell you, here's how I benefited from that. I wouldn't change anything because here's how it affected my life in a positive way.
All right. I want to cover a couple things. One is on pet scanning. Do they always have to be domestic? Because I would imagine trying to scan a wild animal would be, how do you figure out how they communicate? Have you ever scanned a wild animal, or is it mostly always domesticated pets?
I have many times. And it's the same thing. Just connect with them energetically and they communicate telepathically, whether it's a bug or an elephant or a giraffe or a lion.
Oh.
Trees do. Trees, plants, they all communicate telepathically as well.
I have a bunch of flies that started showing up in my house. I'd really love you to talk to them and tell them to leave and go back outside.
Cover your food.
Yeah. I just had the house clean. I wonder if she cleaned with vinegar, and because that kind of attracts them. You have two other books that you did, two children's books. One is Angel Messages for Kids, and the other is Angel Messages for Dogs. Talk a little bit about that, please.
Those are picture books, children's books, Bob. I think they have, I don't know, between 15 and 20 sentences in them. And Angel Messages for Cats is coming out at the end of this year. Those books came about because I had so many moms contact me and say three things. Number one, can you help me explain to my child how they can see spirits and communicate with spirits when mommy and daddy can't? And this child knows information about my deceased grandfather who comes to visit him in his nursery when he's in his crib. This is a toddler. And he tells me Grandpa Bob came, and Grandpa Bob was dead 10 years before little Johnny was ever born. And Grandpa Bob tells little Johnny stuff that there's no way this baby could know. The second reason was, can you please help me explain how my child knows information from past lives that can be corroborated with online historical documents, and this child can't read yet?
Yeah. Wow.
And then the third one is, can you please help me explain to my child what happens when somebody dies? Because we're at the funeral home for my grandmother's viewing or wake, whatever you want to call it, visitation hours. And we say to little Susie, well, honey, grandma's in heaven. And she says, no, she's not. She's asleep in that box up there at the front of the room. And so that's how that came about. And the stories, Bob, are just endless of families whose little children really relate to this information. And the illustrations are beautifully done. Everyone's an individual painting. And so it's an angel giving a message to the child, or giving a message to the dog, or in the new book, giving a message to the cat that the child can absorb. And they resonate with it. I hear from moms all the time. They have to have a book at home, and then they have to have a book in the diaper bag so that they can have it in the car, because they really resonate with it. It's fascinating, the stories that I get to hear.
It's good to, at an early age, tell kids a positive message. Let's give a shout out to the illustrator. Who's the illustrator for the books? Is it the same person?
Yeah. Her name is Ross Webb, and she's in Ireland.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Ireland, though.
Right.
I was at Lilydale. I'm not familiar with Lilydale in New York. It's a spiritual community.
Mm-hmm.
It's where I go if I want to I'll be there for a week, and it's on an energy vortex, and I won't have a negative thought. I'll sleep well. I mean, I'll get up later. I won't drink, I won't eat a lot. And then as soon as I get home in traffic, then it seeps back in. And also, Lilydale is known for fairies. That's something we won't talk about tonight. But Ireland, I don't know what your belief is in fairies, but there's a fairy trail there, and people have gotten some crazy pictures of fairies down there.
My favorite quote, Bob, about fairies is there was an archaeologist doing research in Ireland, and he asked a woman on the street, he said, "Do you believe in fairies?" And she said, "No, sir, I do not, and they're everywhere."
That's great. Yeah, my last two on the Lilydale, I did 3 interviews on Lilydale. The last 2, one was a medium that's a visiting medium, and the other one was people that live there, people that you wouldn't think normally would believe in it, and they really were setting me straight on that. So it was great.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about your books. You're doing a really nice thing for our audience. It's a real treat for our listeners. You want to talk about the gift for our audience members and what they need to do to get it?
Sure. Anybody that would like a free copy of my book, Angelic Attendants, What Really Happens as We Transition from This Life into the Next. And if you have children or grandchildren and you would like a copy of the children's books, we'll send you a digital and audiobook copy. Just go to AskJulieRyan.com, click on the Ask Julie button, and just put a note in there. Hey, I heard you on Bob's show, and I'd love a copy of the book. And we'll send you a link to download the digital and the audiobook versions, just as a gift for listening to Bob and me.
That's great. I'll be the first email you get after this show. That's fantastic. Okay, so any parting advice for our listeners as they try to sort out the truth and their place in this chaotic world? And once again, give us a last plug. I know we've mentioned it, but where they can buy your books, how do they book an appointment, get training, and follow your upcoming events? Everything's
at AskJulieRyan.com. And my parting advice is pay attention to thoughts you have and how they feel. Feels neutral or good, you're in alignment with your spirit. If it feels bad, you're out of alignment. Ask yourself, is this going to kill me in the next 2 minutes? If it is, get out of the road before the bus runs you over. That's irrational fear. If it's not, it's fake news. It's false. As soon as you ask that question, you raise your vibrational level back to spirit. You'll get some guidance, and then you take a step forward. So pay attention to how you feel when you're thinking things. Pay attention to your gut on these times right now, because we're getting so much misinformation and information that's been censored and information that changes that it can just drive you nuts. So pay attention to how things feel. That's an internal GPS system we're all equipped with.
That's great. I think we should also say your podcast is on all the streaming platforms like Spotify. They could go there and they could look for Ask Julie Ryan and get like months of great content to listen to. You're coming up to episode 275 or something, I think you mentioned, correct?
Right. Anywhere you download podcasts, you can find Ask Julie Ryan. Yeah, we're on pretty much all the networks and on YouTube. And we're also on Alexa. So if you say, hey, Alexa, play the Ask Julie Ryan podcast, Alexa will play it for you.
You can't miss it. There's no excuse not to. Well, Julie, thank you so much for your time today. I love talking to you, and you bring so much to the table. It was a fun conversation. And again, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, my honor. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit AfraidOfNothingPodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's AfraidOfNothingPodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout out in an upcoming episode. And the world will know how swell you are.